I was 14 the first time I realized hunger has a sound. It isn't a rumble, it's a small, embarrassed cough your stomach makes when you pass a pot of stew that doesn't belong to you. I learned to cough back like we had an agreement. People say from grass to grace like it's a straight road, a clean before and after. Mine was a long corridor of closed doors, and it started the day a landlord held our cooking pot like a trophy and said, "Out, today." My mother stared at the ground because looking him in the eye would have cost her more pride than she could spare. I was old enough to hate him and young enough to cry in the gutter where our clothes waited like witnesses. That afternoon, I made the first promise of my life. I won't stay here. I won't rot inside this smallness. I'll make the kind of money that makes landlords greet me first and practice respect on my shadow. I kept that promise by doing everything people say a boy shouldn't do if he wants to grow tall, carrying blocks until my spine learned to pray, hawking sachet water until my voice learned how to smile while begging, waking at 4 to scrub shop floors, so hard the tiles told me their confessions. At night, I stole school from the radio because school didn't want me then. I repeated words to myself until they sounded like secret codes. That is how I learned the language of survival: price, change, receipt, carryover, repeat. The first betrayal came wrapped in kindness. My mother's cousin, Uncle Jude, wore shirts that always looked freshly ironed even when he swore he was struggling. He said, "Come live with us, I'll put you in school. You're sharp, a mind like yours shouldn't be wasted." In his house I learned 2 things fast: how to be invisible and how being invisible still doesn't protect you from blame. His wife would count the meat and count it again, then look at me like a thief in training. His son, 2 years older and half as hungry, had a way of laughing that sounded like cutting paper. When visitors came, I became the family's testimony. We picked him from the gutter. See how he speaks now. Later I washed plates while my cousin slept with math textbooks open like umbrellas against rain that never came. I passed the entrance exam the same week my mother coughed blood for the first time. The paper said admission, the doctor said tuberculosis. We had enough money for one of those announcements and my mother chose mine. "Go," she said, folding the hospital bill like it was a letter from a stingy relative. "If you sit in a classroom, I can breathe better." She said it and then coughed until the wall agreed to hold her upright. I promised again. This time it was to time itself. Don't outpace me yet. Let me win one race. School was an ocean and I arrived with a spoon. Everyone else seemed to know where to sit, how to talk, how to wear shoes without apologizing to the ground. I learned to read faces faster than books. The principal liked donors. Teachers liked boys who had been born ready. Girls liked boys who pretended not to see them. I liked anyone who said my name without pity in it. The second betrayal came dressed as opportunity. A small tech hub opened 2 streets away, cement floors, glass doors, fake plants that believed in themselves. I hung by the window every afternoon until one of the managers noticed me. His name was Desmond, the sort of man who could sell you your own watch with a smile and make you thank him for the discount. He handed me a poster for a code for change boot camp. "Free," he said, "for kids who really want it." That night I chanted HTML tags to myself like prayer beads and built my first page on a borrowed phone with a cracked screen that sliced my thumb into commas. The boot camp accepted me. When I showed my mother the email, her eyes shone with the kind of pride that makes light of hospital rooms. She pressed the phone to her chest and whispered, "Grace." I fell in love with logic the way some people fall in love with faces. Functions didn't lie or get tired. Bugs hid but could be dragged into light. The instructor was a woman named Solip who typed like she was playing a soft drum. She looked at my code, then at me and said, "Who taught you to indent your pain this neatly?" I laughed then because I knew what she meant without knowing. She pushed me hard and praised me softly. When the boot camp ended, they were taking 2 interns. I became one. The other was a boy whose shoes cost more than our rent had ever cost. Life likes to add jokes even to the good chapters. Desmond took a special interest in me. He said my hunger was attractive in a market sense. He gave me responsibilities that tasted like trust: write a proposal, present a demo, pitch to a man who shook my hand like he wanted to keep it. The day after our pitch, Desmond took me aside, voice low, smile bright. "Investors like stories," he said. "Your gutter to glory angle, we'll use that. It moves hearts and hearts move wallets." I nodded because I thought power didn't change words, it only made them louder. Then he said, "By the way, I'll need your deck by Friday. Don't send it to anyone else, I'll forward the final." That was the day I should have learned to keep my own copies in a safe where compliments can't reach. I didn't. The humiliation that made my bones remember their first promise happened 3 months later in a hotel ballroom that smelled like money and new leather. Lights, cameras, a stage with a screen that didn't blink. We were finalists in a startup challenge that could feed our company for a year. I wore a borrowed blazer and humility. Desmond took the mic. He told my story as if he had birthed it. Uneven childhood, a mind sharpened on hardship, code learned under a flickering bulb. People leaned in. I recognized my sentences wearing his cologne. Then he introduced the lead developer who made it possible and called the other intern to the stage. My name hung in the air without a hook to catch it. I clapped like a trained audience because my hands didn't know what else to do. Later at the back, he squeezed my shoulder and said, "Politics. Donors get nervous with certain narratives. Don't take it to heart." I took it to every organ I owned. That night, I wrote resignation letters in my head and then deleted them with rent calculations. Poetic justice doesn't arrive on a horse. It arrives as a text at 2:13 a.m. from a number you don't recognize. Your code is on GitHub under someone else's name. I blinked awake and followed the link. There it was, my commit history amputated, my comments rewritten to sound like bullet points instead of breath. The account's bio, building from the margins. The profile picture was the other intern's face, edited with confidence. I didn't cry. Rage dried me fast. I printed everything like an old man, preparing for war, and walked sleep-drunk to Soleip's apartment, because I needed someone who would look at the evidence and not at my status. She opened the door in a sweatshirt that announced she did not care about sleep more than justice. She read, she scrolled back, she sat and looked at me for a long 2 seconds. "We fight," she said simply, "but we fight clean." She sent emails that sounded like law without the price tag, timestamps, screenshots, the style prints every coder leaves behind the way thieves leave footprints. She called a journalist who cared about first-generation kids and the way corridors get rearranged to keep us walking longer. Desmond called me at noon, voice tight, politeness held together by pins. We could have handled this internally. I kept my words measured like medicine. I tried internally and got indigestion. I want surgery. The article dropped that evening. The headline wore a suit, the body wore teeth. The internet did what it does when a simple villain meets a complicated victim. It shouted, then looked for where to send attention like flowers. Desmond issued a statement so neutral it could have been for a weather report. The intern deleted his account and posted a NoteSap apology that said he was inspired by my work. Inspired like a photocopier. HR called it unfortunate. Legal called it settled. My mother called it the world showing you itself. I called it my last day there. Leaving felt like slipping off a wet shirt that had convinced me it was protection. Grace started like a dare. I built a tiny product with nothing but insomnia and borrowed AWS credits, a dashboard that helped market women track cooperative savings on a phone that could barely imagine apps. It looked ugly the way newborns look ugly if you don't love them. But it worked. I took it to Mama Chinia's stall in front of the bus stop, the one with the loud voice and the arithmetic of a hawk. She tried it, blinked, then shouted, "It keeps everything, even Ada's debt." It kept everything. Gossip did the rest. 10 women became 50 in 2 weeks, not because the product was beautiful, but because it remembered and it didn't gossip. I charged a fee so small it felt like I had mispriced air. Small multiplied quickly. When something starts to work, you find out which doors were locked and which ones were pretending to be locked. Banks answered my emails. Mentors returned calls. The bootcamp offered office space. 2 boys I had taught at a roadside cyber cafe joined me. Samuel, who could turn bugs into features by looking at them sideways, and Inai, who talked to users like their feedback was currency. We kept costs low by agreeing to be both janitors and CTOs, depending on the hour. I visited my mother every evening. She had learned to eat again, even if soft things still made her tired. She liked to hold my phone like it was a passport I had forged for both of us. "Users," she would say, mispronouncing it into something sweeter. "How are your users today?" I told her about their complaints because that's how you honor people who pay you. You let their complaints enter your house without removing their shoes. The second humiliation was public, cinematic, and oddly delicious in hindsight. A national TV program invited young founders for a panel. Desmond was there in a navy suit with pockets deep enough for regret, the intern reborn as a creative lead at a fashion brand. I wore the only blazer I owned and the memory of my first promise. The host asked about ethics. Desmond smiled the way crocodiles smile when they've recently eaten. "We all make mistakes in growth," he said. "The key is learning. The camera found me because cameras always know where the wound is. I didn't let it savor me. I said, growth without accountability is just appetite." Twitter clipped it into a GIF and fed it to the day. Investors called in the morning. Money does not fix a life. It builds a ladder and then asks if you're dizzy. We raised a small round that felt like someone had handed me a new alphabet. I spelled carefully: product, team, runway, partnership. We hired 3 women who ran market associations like small countries. They taught me more in 1 week than any panel ever did: how trust moves, why reminders must arrive at the right hour, how culture can make or kill a feature. We launched a version in 3 languages, and our charts finally began to look like the answer to a prayer I hadn't known I was praying precisely. The landlord who once held our pot knocked one morning and greeted with 2 hands, the way people greet priests in power. He laughed too loudly and said he had always believed I would do well. I didn't remind him of the gutter. Karma had already given him a soft slap by letting him watch my mother sign a year's rent with a pen that did not shake. The third betrayal arrived not as theft but as fatigue. Samuel burned out. I lost an aunt and didn't return for weeks. I watched our metrics flatten like a tire and remembered that grace is not just the money that arrives, it's the mercy that stays when everything else wants to leave. I set new hours, not because we had earned them, but because people don't survive on adrenaline alone. We hired another developer who wrote code like he was composing a lullaby. The lullaby steadied our ship. Then came the day Grace stopped being a private phenomenon and decided to dress up. A big cooperative in the north adopted our tool. A diaspora angel investor, who'd grown up folding her mother's wrappers at a stall like the ones we served, wrote a check with a note that said, "Make it easier for women like her to be the CFOs they already are." We moved to a room with windows tall enough for ambition. The sign on the door carried our name in a typeface that finally stopped apologizing. I took my mother there on a Tuesday. She sat in the receptionist's chair as if she owned the whole building, which was not inaccurate because her stubborn lungs had co-signed everything I had done. The team clapped. She laughed the laugh I had been chasing since the hospital, the one that bubbles first in the eyes. She touched the wall like it was a forehead she could bless. When she left, she whispered, "The road was not fair, but look at your feet." The last piece of poetic justice arrived dressed as an invitation. The hotel ballroom again, but this time I owned my slides and my story. Desmond shook my hand like a man volunteering at his own funeral. The moderator asked about from grass to grace. I told the truth, the less Instagrammable one, that sometimes grass cuts you until you bleed enough to water your future. That grace is not a prize, it's a practice, showing up, telling the truth louder than the lie that won last week, learning how to say no to people who used to terrify you. I ended with the line that still tastes like victory in my mouth. I didn't make it because I was special. I made it because people who had nothing still found a way to share their something with me. Afterwards, a boy stopped me in the corridor with a notebook full of dreams and bad drawings. He said he slept in a shop where rats argued with him over bread. He asked how to start when everything is already late. I told him to stop waiting for permission, to build ugly and listen carefully, to keep copies of his work and receipts for his dignity, to find a Solate before he found a Desmond. He wrote it all as if I were giving him the coordinates to a treasure I had buried somewhere kind. I went home that night and cooked for my mother in a kitchen that truly belonged to us. The pot wasn't a trophy anymore, it was just a pot, which is the highest honor a pot can achieve. We ate, and when she slept, I sat at the table with the window open and let the city night do what it does, lie about rest. I wrote a new promise, this time not to myself. I wrote it to every kid who knows hunger's cough and the landlord's grin, to every girl's hands that count money no one sees, to cousins washed into kitchens and told to be grateful, to every boy peeling code from a cracked phone screen. Here's the promise, I will leave the door unlatched. I will name the traps out loud. I will be the call that says, your work is yours, and the hand that says, take this ladder, it's ugly but it holds. If you're hearing my voice now, somewhere between a gutter and a glass door, know this, the corridor has more exits than it pretends. The doors are allergic to persistence. Some betrayals are just rehearsals for the boundary you will never let be crossed again. Some humiliations are sandpaper, they teach you the shape of your own dignity by trying to scrub it off. And grace. Grace begins the moment you stop auditioning for mercy and start practicing it, on yourself first, on others as soon as you can afford the risk. I don't have a bow to tie this with. Success didn't make the world fair, it made me stubborn in the right direction. The boy who coughed back at his hunger still lives here, tidier now, more rested, but ready to wash floors again if that's what the next version requires. The man who once clapped for his own erasure now owns a pen that signs his name with both hands. If karma is listening, I want it to know I see its work. I see it in the landlord's careful greeting, in the way the intern avoids my gaze and then sends an email asking for advice, in Desmond's silence when the reporter asks about the early days. I don't need apologies to be loud anymore. I can hear them in the pauses. Tomorrow we'll ship a version that fixes the bug that made reminders arrive at 3:00 a.m. like an anxious friend. Tomorrow I'll hire a boy from the shop down the road because I know his look. It was mine. Tomorrow my mother will ask after my users, and I'll say they are fine because most days they are, and when they're not, our inbox collects their small storms and we answer them one at a time. That is grace too, to be needed in ways that don't flatter you but keep you honest. So this is my story told by its survivor. I walked on grass that cut and arrived at grace that doesn't. It took betrayal to teach me boundaries, humiliation to teach me poise, hunger to teach me arithmetic, and mercy to teach me usefulness. If you are at the beginning, I won't lie about the distance, but I'll tell you the truth that matters. I didn't climb alone. I was lifted by women who count, by mentors who type quietly, by boys who write code like lullabies, by a mother whose lungs fought to stay long enough to see a sign on a door. And if you meet me at a ballroom, don't clap yet. Ask me about the corridor. I'll show you where the doors are. Grace does not announce itself with trumpets. It sneaks in quietly on days you almost give up. I remember the morning I knew I had crossed over, not just from hunger to food or from rent to ownership, but from grass to grace. It wasn't at a conference or a boardroom. It was in the market where it all began, standing beside Mama Chinia's stall. She looked at me, her wrapper faded, her hands dusted with groundnut powder, and she said, "Your app works. We trust it more than we trust the chairman." That was it. No applause, no magazine cover, just trust. That was grace. When I went home that evening, my mother was waiting at the gate. Her body was weaker now, her steps slower, but her smile carried the same strength that had raised me from the gutter. I showed her the new office keys, the contracts, the receipts, all the things she had once only prayed for. She held them in her hands, closed her eyes, and whispered, "I can rest now." Tears fell down my face, hot and unstoppable. I realized then that grace isn't measured by how far I had climbed. It was measured by how much peace I had given her. Years passed, our company expanded, touching villages I had never heard of. Market women became CFOs of their own cooperatives. Children wore uniforms and carried books instead of hunger. Young developers joined us, some from streets rougher than mine, and I told them the truth. Don't be fooled by the lights. Behind every headline are nights of crying, days of betrayal, and scars that still itch when the weather changes. But scars are proof you healed. Wear them. The betrayals faded into background noise. Desmond disappeared from the industry, swallowed by the silence he once demanded from me. The cousin who mocked me sent me his CV. The multinational that once tried to own me now introduced me on panels as a pioneer. Even Amara, the one who whispered my roadmap into another man's phone, reached out years later with regret heavy in her voice. I forgave, not because she deserved it, but because grace had taught me that forgiveness is lighter to carry than bitterness. One evening, sitting alone on my balcony, I opened the shoebox of receipts I had kept since the beginning. The old rent slips, the first internet bills, the faded bus tickets from nights when I had no money for taxis. I spread them out like photographs. Each one was a page of my story. Each one whispered, "You survived this too." I realized I didn't need the box anymore. The proof was no longer on paper, it was in me. Now when people ask me, "How did you make it? How did you go from grass to grace?" I smile, not the practiced smile of panels, but the honest smile of someone who remembers. I tell them I was betrayed. I was humiliated, I was underestimated, but I kept walking, I kept receipts, I kept faith. And when grace finally arrived, I treated it not as a throne but as a table, one wide enough to sit others. Because that's the real ending, or maybe the real beginning. Grace is not complete until it multiplies. My story isn't just mine anymore. It belongs to every boy washing floors while dreaming of code, every girl carrying silence she did not choose, every hustler coughing back at hunger while promising themselves a better tomorrow. So if you're listening to me now in a room too small for your dreams, with shoes too tired for the road ahead, hear this: betrayal is not your end. Humiliation is not your curse. They are the chisels that carve your resilience. Walk through the corridor. Keep walking when the doors pretend to be locked. Grace is waiting, not at the end of the road, but in the steps you take refusing to stop. I am no longer the boy the landlord mocked. I am no longer the cousin's servant. I am no longer the ghost of someone else's pitch. I am a man who built from hunger, who stitched betrayal into armor, who turned silence into voice. I am grace, not because I reached it, but because I survived long enough to become it. And if my story leaves you with only one truth, let it be this: your grass does not disqualify you, it fertilizes you. And when grace comes, let it not only crown you, let it feed the ones still crawling through the dirt. That is the justice life owes us. That is the promise I keep. Please don't forget to share, like, comment, and subscribe.